It's been over 20 years since San Francisco endured a magnitude 7.1 earthquake, known around here as the World Series quake. And many are asking, is California due for a big one? It was just 15 seconds, but a lifetime for some who survived it.
Lights were falling out of the ceilings. People were running around screaming.
The gas mains were broken. It's feeding the major fires.
When I came to, woke up from unconsciousness, I'm looking down at the waters.
Severe major earthquake that struck the San Francisco area.
It seemed nothing could top what was happening at Candlestick Park that afternoon. Game 3 of baseball's World Series between the San Francisco Giants and Oakland A's was about to start.
All of a sudden, the first thing I thought was that the people above us in the upper deck, we're in the mezzanine, were pounding bats.
Al Michaels was co-hosting the TV pregame show.
So the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earth.
I think the word that came out was earth, and you had a little bit of the Q sound as a K, and that was it. Then we got knocked off the air.
That World Series broadcast not only alerted the world to what was happening here, it likely saved countless lives. That's because thousands of Bay Area commuters who normally at 5 in the afternoon would be crowding bridges and highways were instead safely parked in front of their TV sets, watching the game. Still, 42 people died when part of the Nimitz Freeway in Oakland collapsed. On the Bay Bridge, which connects Oakland to San Francisco, part of the upper roadway gave way just as Bruce Steffen was driving across it.
It was like someone had grabbed the end of the bridge and just gave it a great big shake, and the whole bridge started to drop right out from underneath me. And I remember the last thing that I said was, we're going to die.
The 6.9 quake struck along the infamous San Andreas Fault. But that's not the fault that most concern scientists these days. So beneath these cracks, this goes down about 6 miles.
It goes down 6 miles.
In a suburban parking lot, government geologist David Schwartz points to a seemingly innocuous line of cracks that in fact mark the Hayward Fault, running straight up the heavily populated East Bay.
It hits this wall, and over time it actually pulls the wall apart.
The last big quake along this fault was in 1868. Scientists say another is due.
This is the fault that we're really worried about.
And how catastrophic would a sizable quake be here?
Well, estimates run anywhere between about 110 and $220 billion in damage.
For more insight, I'm joined by Richard Allen, seismologist and professor of Earth and Planetary Science at UC Berkeley. Professor, good morning. Thanks so much for coming on. Before we talk about the threat in this part of the country, a quick question. 5.7 quake in Puerto Rico. I think a lot of us were caught off guard by a quake in Haiti. Is that a typically seismically active region?
Yeah, no, we see a lot of earthquakes in Puerto Rico, and so building codes in Puerto Rico try to take that into account. Magnitude 5 is only a moderate-sized earthquake, so we wouldn't really expect much damage from that kind of event.
Let's talk about this part of the country, the Bay Area, the famous 1906 quake. We talked about the one 20 years ago and this concern about Hayward. There have been a lot of earthquakes around the world lately, it seems. Are there more than we're used to?
Well, we've seen a lot of earthquakes, that's for sure. When we look at the total number of events, it's not an unusually large number. What's different this year is that we've had quite a few that have been beneath populated regions, and so we've seen the effect of them on our society, and that's why it seems like there's been a large number.
What have you learned from watching the experience in Haiti and then Chile, for example, which was an even larger quake?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we can see is that we do know how to build buildings that can withstand earthquakes. In Chile, the buildings are built to withstand earthquakes, and they did, and that's why we saw a relatively small number of fatalities for an earthquake of that size. Whereas Haiti, the buildings were not built to withstand.
But here we're standing in downtown San Francisco. We talked about the threat of the Hayward Fault nearby, the San Andreas. As I look at these buildings, how would they rate compared to what we saw in Chile?
So the buildings here in California are built to the same kind of standards as Chile. So Chile is a better analogy for us when we think about earthquakes. The catch is that we have to worry about the older buildings, the buildings that were built before our modern retrofit standards. And those are the buildings that we're concerned may collapse during the big event.
You do have historical models of how different fault lines have created earthquakes along. Does that bring you any closer to predictions? Can you at least narrow down and say, this year, next 5 years?
Well, we know there's going to be big earthquakes in California in the next few decades, and that's what we call forecasting, and that's basically as good a job as we can do. We can't predict earthquakes, and most seismologists agree that we're not going to be able to predict earthquakes in the foreseeable future. But what we can now do is we can provide warnings of earthquakes, so we can use our seismic networks and modern communications to detect the beginnings of an earthquake and then provide a few seconds to a few tens of seconds warning before the shaking starts.
And then I keep thinking about the massive population. Just over my shoulder in the East Bay is that Hayward Fault, Oakland. There are millions of people over there living on these fault lines. Does it make any sense at all?
Well, you know, it's a beautiful place, California. You took a drive down the coastal road yesterday, and the same process that gives us this beautiful topography, this beautiful scenery, also results in earthquakes. So the two things come together. So we have to make the most of it. At the same time, we have to be ready for these earthquakes and make sure that our homes are going to withstand the shaking.
Professor Richard Allen, thanks so much for coming out with us. We do appreciate you having you here this morning.
My pleasure.